Thank you for joining me for another personal pondering in the Psalms. And the psalm in which we are pondering today is Psalm 62. Those of you that have seen several of these short devotionals will know that I'm fascinated by the structure of psalms, individual psalms, but also ways psalms are grouped together within the book of Psalms. And one of the things that has really struck me as over recent months I've been working my way through the Psalms is how there are little collections of psalms that come together and help give it meaning. So I've pointed out to you before, for example, that Psalms 52 onwards are all taken from different periods in David's life when he is under great opposition, on the run, very often in danger of his own life, and crying out to God for help. And that sequence runs on to about 64, I think, not 62, as I think I've mentioned previously. But what also struck me recently is this, that as you go through this small collection from 52 onwards, towards the end of that collection, the note of confidence and assurance gets stronger and stronger. The enemies are still there in David's mind and awareness, but they begin to pale a little bit more into the background as David's confidence in God is asserted with great clarity and strength. And that's certainly true in Psalm 62. Another of the keys to understanding a psalm, as I've mentioned before, is repetition. And there's two sorts of repetition in Psalm 62 that are helpful to us. Notice, for example, that verses 1 and 2 are almost word for word repeated in verses 5 to 6. So that gives us an idea about the structure and the theme of the psalm. But there is a slight variation, which I'll draw your attention to in a moment. But the other repetition in this psalm is the word translated in most English language translations as alone. It comes several times, 6 times in this psalm, at least 6 in the Hebrew, not always 6 in the English. 4 times David is speaking about God and his confidence in God, twice in reference to his enemies. Notice in verse 1, God alone, for God alone my soul waits. Verse 2, he only, it's the same word, he only is my rock and my salvation. That's repeated in verses 5 and 6. So David is saying, my unshakable and unique confidence is in God. That's where I put my trust. Now, as he says that, he also points out the folly of putting trust in anything else, including himself. Notice how he speaks about himself in verse 3. How long will all of you attack a man to batter him? Like a leaning wall or tottering fence. That's how David views himself against his enemies. I've no rigidity, I've no strength, I've no stability. So I'm not going to put any confidence in my own self. And I'm not going to have any hope or confidence or trust in my enemies. I'm not going to fear them either. Look how he speaks about in verse 9 and 10. They are but a breath. They're a delusion. In the balance as they go up. They're so light. Put no trust in extortion. So David says, in God alone is my hope. Not in myself. I've no confidence or hope in my enemies, and I'm certainly not going to fear them anymore. My hope is in God alone. What a great statement to be able to make with all sincerity. If David was alive today, I've no doubt he would lustily sing that lovely modern hymn, in Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my rock, my strength, and my stay. Now, 2 other things I want you to know briefly about this psalm. I mentioned that 1 and 2 is repeated in 5 and 6, but there is a slight variation. Look at verse 1. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. Verse 5, for God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. So in the second occurrence, David is having a little conversation with himself and reminding himself, continue to wait in silence before God. Trust in God. It's not a one-off momentary attitude. It's a lifelong perspective. So David says, I will continue to wait in silence. And every now and then, we need to counsel our own souls and remind ourselves of some great biblical and theological truths and teach them to our hearts again. Second thing I want you to notice is what David knows about God, that it gives him confidence to have hope in God alone. In verse 11 and 12. Once God has spoken, twice have I heard this, that's a Hebraism, that power belongs to God, and that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love. Power and steadfast love. Now, Power without steadfast love would be a scary thing. Love without power would be feeble and weak. But power and steadfast love together, now that's a combination in which you want to put your trust, isn't it? For God alone, because my God is a God of power and steadfast love. My God is a God of strong love. I trust that's where your confidence is today, and I trust that's only where your confidence is, for everything else will let you down. The Lord bless you.